Now today's video is going to be more of a part 2 of my last video, which goes over my node structure and how I color correct and grade my footage before I do film emulation. And I wanted to dedicate this video to pure film emulation because it's a whole subject in and of itself. But just to catch you up to speed in case you haven't seen that video, here's my node tree, which actually you can download for free using the link in the description. The first node is a color space transform, and this is converting S-Log3 into Davinci wide gamut. Then in node 2, I made an exposure adjustment. In this shot, I just brought it down a little bit. The third node is for white balance, and for this shot, I didn't feel like I needed to correct anything, so I left it alone. Here is my contrast, which again, if you want to know more of how I dial in my contrast, go ahead and watch the last video. Here's just my saturation, and you can see that on and off, so I like to have that on. Didn't do any secondary adjustments where I just had hues, vignettes, or anything like that. And then it's going to the 7th node where I'm going from Davinci Wide Intermediate into Rec 709. Then after I have it converted to Rec 709, I apply my finishing LUT, which adds the sort of filmic look without all the film elements. And this is why I wanted to dedicate a video to purely film emulation. Because although we have filmic colors, we don't have any blooming, we don't have any grain, we don't have any halation, we don't have any film compression going on. And that's why I say the film emulation as the last step, because this is gonna be the final touches to really drive home the film look. Now in today's video, we're gonna be using Dehancer. This is one of the best tools you can get, especially if you wanna do proper film emulation. This plugin has so many different parameters that you can change, but I'm gonna share with you my favorites that I like to use. Dragging this into any node will default to this look, but scroll down to the bottom and press disable all tools to start with a clean slate. The first standout feature is they allow you to choose your input source information. By default, it's set to Rec 709, but you can set it to work in Davinci Wide Gamut, or you can simply input the camera make and model. I shoot on Sony, but because my current node structure already handles going from S-Log to Davinci Wide Gamut and finally to Rec 709, I'm gonna leave this at the default setting of Rec 709. Having this flexibility is great because it makes the plugin mold to your workflow. And if your workflow ever changes, Dehancer can easily adjust itself to work best for you. We also have here some compensation tools, but because we already handled that in the previous nodes, I won't be using them. Moving on to the panel below, we have the film panel. This essentially applies a film negative to your image. Now, the nice thing about Dehancer is you have access to so many film emulations from AFCA to Fuji to Kodak to Ilford and so much more. In today's video, I'm gonna be using the Kodak Gold preset. I felt like this looked the best with my shot. And although I already have my finishing LUT applied, as you can see, I can stack these two together. So I have the DNA of my film look that I already wanted, but I'm enhancing it with Dehancer. So it's really great that I can use both of these together and I don't have to compromise on using one or the other. Pushing this to the left gives a more subtle impression of the film negative, and pulling it to the right intensifies the look. I actually like it pulled all the way to the right, so I'm gonna leave it there. The film developer slides can compensate for contrast or saturation loss from the film negative, but I don't typically use these, so I'll be leaving them alone. Film compression is another key feature to getting the film look, as it softens the highlights, emulating the highlight roll-off of shooting on film. I'm going to be using this gray gradient to showcase what these parameters do. Impact determines how much compression you'd like. Higher values push more of the highlights towards the midtones, essentially flattening the image. And setting this to 0 completely bypasses the compression. As you can see, this gently compresses highlights with no harsh angles in the waveform while maintaining your white point. To keep this simple, I leave this and the rest of the parameters at their default position while only adjusting the impact slider to taste. Although highlight compression is very useful to selling the film look, this can also leave your image looking a bit dull. Adjust the white point if you'd like to compensate for the loss of brightness, but use subtly, as this can kind of undo the highlight compression that you just did, and also going too far can clip your image. This module gives us access to film prints like Kodak 2383 and Fujifilm 3515, giving us the classic teal and orange look or the green and yellow look, respectively. Enabling these looks can be pretty intense by default, but setting the analog range limiter can help ease the intensity. I've also noticed using these prints with an input of Rec 709 adds a bit of boost in exposure, but in my experiments, I found when using Kodak 2383, bringing the exposure down 0.3 will compensate for the boost, while bringing the exposure down 0.375 seems to be a good compensation when using Fujifilm 3515. In this shot, I think I'll stick to the Kodak 2383 print, but I'll dial back the saturation just a little as it's looking a little too saturated for my liking. I'm also going to go back to my contrast node and reduce the contrast, as the print does add a little bit of contrast. As far as the other sliders, I don't adjust them all too much, but the target white essentially makes the look warmer or cooler. I typically leave it at the default position. The color head tool allows you to adjust the color tones in different ranges of your image. I do most of my balancing in the previous nodes, but sometimes if I feel the blue from the 2383 print is a little too much, then I'll adjust the shadow tone to neutralize some of the blue in the shadows. Dehancer has some amazing grain presets, emulating the fine grain of 65mm all the way to the chunky grain of 8mm film. A popular size is 35mm, but my preferred is 65mm as it's more of a subtle grain. Halation is one of the most signature aspects of film emulation, yet it's also one of the features hardest to emulate. Dehancer has some great halation presets, but be careful with halation as the more intense the look, the more distracting, cliche, and unnatural it can be. Subtlety is key here. With that said, I usually use the 65mm preset and reduce the amplify slider to give it even more of a subtle effect. Bloom adds glow around your highlights and can make your footage feel whimsical and dreamlike, but just like the parameters above, I like a more subtle glow. Film damage adds dust and scratches to your shot. I don't usually use this, but it's nice to have in there in the rare times I need it. Film breath modulates your footage from green to magenta to blue and yellow and adds a bit of flicker to your footage. The 8mm preset really shows what this does and can be a cool subtle effect at the 35mm and 65mm presets. Gateweave introduces jitter to your footage, emulating more of the mechanics of shooting on film, but this look can be a bit intense, especially for long periods of time, so use with taste. Overscan adds different types of film gates, which can make your footage feel old and nostalgic. I usually use this for recaps of trips I've been on, or to make my camcorder feel like an old film camera. I also like to uncheck the static gate as it gives the gate more life and further sells the overscan look. You'll notice at the top I'm not getting a full playback because as you stack these effects on top of each other, it can be very resource intensive. And I don't have a crazy top of the line computer, but I don't have a slouch either. I have a 14-inch M4 Pro MacBook Pro with 24 gigabytes of RAM. So it's a pretty good computer, and for the most part it handles everything just fine, but Dehancer is notoriously known for being a bit resource intensive. So keep that in mind if you plan to pick this up, but maybe you don't have a very powerful computer. You might need to go to playback and dial back the playback resolution to quarter or to half, depending on your performance. But as you can see, once I put this playback to quarter, I'm not really getting a good enough look to dial in these parameters. Now, one quick tip that I like to do with Dehancer is I like to put it on an adjustment clip over all of my footage. So having Dehancer in an adjustment clip allows me to deactivate it pretty much on a global scale. That way I can continue editing without any playback issues, and then when I'm ready to reapply it, I can just hit D to reactivate that clip, and then boom, I got my look back. Now, this video is not sponsored by Dehancer, but I do have a 10% off code in case you are interested in getting Dehancer. So if you're interested in picking this up, make sure to use the code in the description in order to get 10% off Dehancer. And I do want to let you know that film emulation does require some sort of plugin. So using the built-in film look creator or Dehancer are gonna be a must when you want to do proper film emulation. But yeah, I do use Dehancer on all of my projects when I'm going for that film emulation look. I hope that I gave you enough information to maybe pick it up. But anyway, that's gonna be it for this one, guys. Make sure to like the video. Thank you so much for making it to the end, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.